Hello, this is Minder Chen. In this lecture, we're going to discuss project management, monitoring, and control. And we're going to focus on one of the technique called earned value management as a method and technique to help us to monitor and control a project in terms of its schedule and its cost. If you can find out and try to download an earned value management for dummy book if you follow this link. Let's kind of review a few things before we actually get started. And we do talk about project planning, and after you finish your plan, you will execute your plan, and you do need to constantly monitor and control what's going on to decide it, to kind of assess whether you are on the right track in terms of executing your plan. And that's where the monitoring control will come in. But let's review what has been planned. And in planning, we need to focus on scope first, and then through the scope or the so-called work breakdown structure, we would define what kind of activity need to be performed. We would determine the dependency or the sequencing of the activity, estimate the time that's required to perform these activities, but at the same time, we do need to thinking about the resource constraint. And based on the resource that's required and resource constraint, we may revise actually our schedule. And based on the resource required, we can also come up with a cost estimate. And from the cost estimate, we will come up eventually the budget for the whole project. There are other things that we do need to plan. For instance, quality planning, communication, risk, and even stakeholder, all of that need to be planned and managed. So let's focus on the cost aspect of it. We do need to gather various input for us to determine the cost for a project. Sometimes based on historical data, and sometimes based on the original project plan or scope. Okay. The next things that in project cost management is to estimate the cost. And a lot of time we do rely on expert to help us to estimate the cost. But there are other estimation methods. One that we introduced before is called parametric estimation. For instance, if you're moving a home, moving company may actually assess the moving cost based on how many rooms that you have and take into a few other factors into consideration. If you have a lot of books, it will be heavy and they would charge you a little bit more. Okay. And eventually, based on the estimated cost, and we need to kind of formalize it and firm it up as a budget. Okay. And once we have the budget set, we can actually use the budgetary data to help us to control not just the cost, but also the schedule. One of the techniques that we're going to focus on is this earned value management, which is a very popular approach to help us to kind of keep track of a project to see whether it's on track. So let's come back to the basic of project monitoring and control. The first step, first of all, you do need to have a plan in place. Otherwise, you have nothing to compare to. And once you have the plan, then you will try to measure your progress in terms of tasks to be done, money that's supposed to be spent, and etc. So that's the measurement, gathering data about the status of the project. And then we need to assess where we are and is it consistent with what we have planned. And that kind of assessment or evaluation will help us to decide what corrective action that we're supposed to do in case we're off track, like project has been delayed or we're over budget. Then you need to figure out what's wrong and whether we need to revise. It is possible you revise the plan, and also it is possible that you would try to take action, corrective action, to bring the project back on track. So control is a process comparing actual performance against the plan to find out whether there's any deviations, and find out what action we should take, and take those actions to bring the project back on track. So the step we mentioned earlier is have a baseline plan, measuring the progress and performance, compare that with the plan, and taking the action. So that's actually the control mechanism. In a broader sense, control monitoring involves the control monitoring of the scope of the project, the schedule of the project, the cost of the budget of the project, and also controlling the procurement process or even the communication process, as well as the stakeholder that we need to keep track of. So it is part of process in the whole project life cycle, from the project initiation, planning, to the execution, to the control. And once you finish everything that has been executed, then it's the project closeout phase. But we are going through this kind of loop many times before we finish the project. We've seen this one before. It's a nice diagram. I like it. I think that gives us a proper perspective of some of the major project planning activity. First of all, it's the triangle: scope, schedule, budget. Budget could be named differently, like budget, cost, or even resource are really part of this budget over here. So the scope, you need to come up with the project breakdown structure or work breakdown structure. Basically, it's your requirement and the work breakdowns. And then based on what need to be done, you go into the scheduling, project scheduling aspect of a project planning. You would try to identify activity, try to sequencing them using the network diagram, and eventually you would estimate the time that's required to perform each of the activity, and then come up with a schedule. So eventually you will have a milestone using Gantt chart, and etc. And once you have a schedule, then you need to assign the necessary resources to various tasks which you have specified in your schedule. And sometimes due to the resource constraint, we may actually need to adjust our schedule to make sure the resource is available to us. And in doing so, eventually we can come up with the resource plan or resource schedule, and sometimes we call it resource calendar, like when certain resources need to be available to us. And we can also come up with the cost plan and eventually the payment plan. Payment plan is really just part of the budget. When you will release the budgeted funding to the project manager to be used to pay off vendors, salary, etc. So in terms under the budget, it's resource, cost, and budget, or here we call it payment. As I mentioned, the planning process is kind of an iterative process. You started with a scope, and then you would do some estimation in terms of the effort of the activity which need to be done, or sometimes we call it work package. The effort, the duration, or even the risk involved, and then eventually you come up with the project schedule and start assigning resource to various tasks within the schedule, and based on the cost for each of the resources, and we can come up with the budget. Okay. And a lot of time, for instance, you find out there's certain constraint about the resource availability, and sometimes you're concerned about the try to smooth out the utilization of the resources. You may actually go back and reschedule the project, adjust the schedule of the project to have a better utilization availability of the resources. And at the end, it's really the project budget that you would develop. Here's just a diagram using Gantt chart to for project control, and this is the original schedule for various tasks within of a project, and this darker area indicate the percentage of completion. We also noted here, and this dotted line, vertical dotted line, just means today's day. So for instance, we know we're kind of behind here, and we're just a little bit behind here. So you can use the Gantt chart to kind of find out whether you're ahead or behind. And visually, it's very easy to tell people the status of various tasks comparing to current date and time, and the percentage of completion to see whether they meet your kind of a planned schedule. In terms of budgeting, we sometimes allocate the money to so-called control account. Control account is a cross-reference typically between work breakdown structure and the organization breakdown structure, which means that you would, if you spend some money on a project, you need to know for which work or task that this is for, and which department is actually using the money to perform the task in this work breakdown structure. So it's a cross-reference between the work breakdown structure and the organizational breakdown structure. So if we follow that, basically we started with the work breakdown structure, we do have the schedule, and then eventually, once we have the estimation in terms of how much it will cost for us to perform various tasks, we can start allocating the budget to the tasks within our schedule. So it will be we call it time-phased cost allocation or budget allocation, and eventually we can actually track the whole project budget based on the timeline and when certain money need to be spent, and this can be very useful for us to keep track of the project performance, and that's really the concept of earned value management in the broader sense. So we'll get back to that a little bit later. Just again, once we have that estimation of the cost for each activity, and we do put various activity into a work package, and work package can be assigned to one of the organization unit, and that become a control account. So you have this kind of aggregation of activity to work package, and assign work package to organization unit, and that's and then assign a control account to it. And if you aggregate or add up all the control account, then you have your then we will have our project estimation. If we add the so-called contingency reserve, that will end up to be our cost baseline. And the cost baseline plus something we call it management reserve, that will become sometimes we call it cost budget or project budget. If you look at just part of this, you'll find out this cost estimate plus contingency reserve equal to cost baseline. Cost baseline plus management reserve equal to project budget. Okay, it's pretty simple. The reserve could be 5%, 10% based on the experience and the risk factor of the project. And it's not try to inflate the project, but it's really just try to manage some of the unknown factor, and so we will have the so-called reserve, contingency reserve and management reserve. Management reserve is actually someone kind of overseeing the project, not the project manager, who would add this and eventually maybe submit it as a funding request to higher up. So this is just an example of a budget summary, and so we can add, actually this is the work breakdown structure over here and over here, and this is actually organizational breakdown structure, so we can basically just add it up, all the cost. If we add this they call it undistributed budget. If we add the so-called contingency reserve, then we'll get the cost baseline. And if we add management reserve, then we'll get the so-called cost budget or project budget. Okay, here in this diagram we use slightly different term. So put it together, we will have work breakdown structure on the top and organizational breakdown structures on the left. So eventually we will have, this is the first step. And once we have this two, the second step is to come up with the work package. And we'll have a time-phased kind of schedule in terms of the task to be done or work package to be done. At the same time, we need to come up with a resource schedule and adjust our time schedule, sometimes based on the resource availability or utilization. And the resource can be labor, can be material, and some additional support effort. And with that, we will come up with a time-phase budget. So time-phase budget doesn't means that it's not just a total number, a sum of all the detailed budgetary item. It's actually, you have to say when certain money need to be spent in order to perform such task. So you will allocate the budget over a time schedule. And then we can use this budgetary data, cost data, to help us to actually monitoring and control the cost spending and even the schedule. That's the earned value management approach. So to control the cost, we do need to have the budgetary information, and we do need to have data about the work performance and also some of the expenditure, the cost we have spent. Then we can kind of control the cost and use it to help us to monitor project work, and also it's part of the project documentation. To control the cost, as I mentioned, there's various techniques. One of them is called earned value management. We do need to have the work performance data. We also need to have the funding requirement, which means project, a kind of a budget plan. in order for us to apply this earned value management approach. And eventually we can use this technique to help us to keep track of the project progress, whether we're behind, where we're ahead, and to give us a heads up what we're facing. So this is kind of a quick overview of some of the things we have already discussed. Next, we're going to get started to discuss the so-called earned value management.